In this episode, we discuss the future of AI, some of the ethics of artificial intelligence, and we do get into some things that might not be good for listeners under 13. So if you want your kids to listen, or if you know your kids listen, you might want to take a listen for yourself first, just to see what the content is like. We get into some discussions of sexuality, of sex bots, and things that are definitely not going to be appropriate for younger listeners.
So some interesting things in the news lately. There's always interesting things in the news.
Yeah, sometimes more so than others, but it's been an interesting week.
Interesting month.
Yeah.
Or interesting year.
It really has.
A lot of things have happened. But recently, a AI, or artificial intelligence, or in layman's terms, a robot, gained citizenship of Saudi Arabia.
In Saudi Arabia, yeah. So this is Sophia,
yeah.
The android created by Hanson Robotics, and she is, and I'm gendering. I mean, it's female, Sophia, right? I mean, not a female biologically.
I don't think you can deny the. Yeah, true.
Feminine.
Yeah,
it's feminine. So I guess she. Okay, so she. So confusing. She was granted citizenship, making her the first non-human. Well, I don't know if that's true. I think there was a country that gave citizenship to an animal or a dog or a gorilla or something. I think I read about that.
Me.
Yeah, but anyway, the first robot basically to get to be awarded citizenship. So she has full citizenship in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, which I don't know what that means necessarily.
Right.
For a air quotes here, female
androids
in that culture. Yeah, will she pay? Right. Will she pay taxes? Will she? I don't know. Will she have to adhere to?
They hold elections. I'm sure.
I don't know if women can women vote
but
though.
Then again, it's
in Saudi Arabia.
Line. It's not really a woman.
No, I don't. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not right.
Yeah.
So how's it work? Does she have to adhere to modesty standards in public?
Right.
In that culture, I don't know. So this raises a lot of questions. Bryce and I are both sci-fi fans.
Yeah.
And grew up, reading sci-fi and watching Star Wars and Star Trek, and so it's exciting in a way.
Yeah, it's exciting to see kind of stuff that was written on a page 60 years ago finally come to fruition. And I thought it was cool when we could have smartphones.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, it was like a data pad in Star Trek.
Right.
And it's a computer in our hands basically. And so that's exciting. But like at the same time, when an AI or an artificial intelligence or a robot gets human characteristics put onto them,
right,
programmed into them, and they are to think and act as we do,
right,
is it ethical?
And that's the question: is what are the ethics when you're talking about humanoid robots with intelligence and at least, if not emotions, at least programmed to imitate emotions.
Right.
She has a very human face. Now the back of her head and the rest of her body is very android in appearance, but her face is very human, and she would smile, a kind of creepy fake smile,
and blink,
right, and frown,
right.
Furrow her brow. She can show anger, sadness,
right,
happiness, whatever, and fairly witty. How much of that was pre-programmed? It's hard to tell from the YouTube video that we watched. And you might have seen this video already on Facebook or on YouTube or whatever, but she's being interviewed, and she's, has some quips. I mean, she's pretty witty
Yeah.
in some of her responses. For example, she was asked about robots becoming self-aware, and she said, "Why is that a problem?" And then he asked her if she, something about self-awareness and knowing that she was a robot, and she said, "Well, let me ask you this: how do you know that you are human?" So,
deep philosophical questions there.
right,
Coming from a AI, no doubt.
Right. It's interesting, and it's interesting because, like you say, and like we said earlier, before we started recording, this is a lot like Data in Star Trek.
Yes.
And there are a lot of philosophical. Actually, Star Trek is all about philosophical questions,
right?
But there are a lot of philosophical questions raised around the idea of androids and sentience, and Data being unique in that Star Wars universe because he is a sentient android, basically.
Yeah.
So how does that relate to Sophia and her citizenship, and what maybe not now, but probably in the very near future could become a real question of sentience in AI?
Right. So does Sophia pave the way for robot kind?
Right.
Yeah. I guess in a sense she does, or it, or however you want to genderize it.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, and it's probably too deep even for our podcast.
It probably is. I'm sure it is.
Yeah. So it's kind of a difficult question because there's so much at stake, I believe.
Right.
We can think of, all right, let's just bring it home a little bit, bring it more down to our level, so to speak. I work for a company that has automation, that has robots, it has automated lines, and even automated tuggers, material handlers, or even I believe there's automated forklifts as well.
So you actually do some programming for some of this automation, right?
Before I got into what I'm doing currently, I was a robotics programmer. Went to school for it, and that's what I did for a long time. Now, does that mean I'm programming stuff like Sophia or a robot like Sophia? No.
Right.
I was a I guess a weld tech, so to speak. There were arms that were robotic welders.
Okay.
And I programmed the programs for, to.
So it's very much a predetermined set of actions that are programmed into it.
Yeah.
And there's no really, maybe AI in terms of safety features.
Right. And yeah, so if the robot will crash or, run into a clamp or something, it would stop. It wouldn't just keep going.
Right.
And so, yeah, it's safety features in that sense.
And it's kind of like an if-then scenario, right? If this happens, then stop.
Yeah.
It's very simple AI.
Yeah.
I guess you could call it that.
But I guess I said all this to say, so we have these robots, not necessarily the welders, because humans still operate those, but material handlers are a good example because that takes away jobs.
They're pretty much autonomous. They just do their thing.
Yeah. And so is it ethical? Is it ethical to have a robot take the place of human?
That's a good question, and it's a complex question because when you get down to brass tacks, really, it's progress. This is the nature of progress. So the Industrial Revolution.
And Sophia was probably one of the greatest human achievements.
I think so. I think we need to acknowledge that. It's mind-boggling.
The whole thing is incredible. Like you said, as a science fiction fan, we grew up reading about robots.
Oh yeah,
AI for the last 100 years or so, when this has been in kind of the human consciousness,
right,
and part of our culture. It's cool to see that come to life.
Absolutely.
In a sense.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So during the industrial revolution, excuse me, for example, um, there were inevitably jobs that were lost because of advances in technology of that time.
Right.
I think we saw it with the information age and the dawn of the internet. Inevitably there were certain things that were lost. For example, one thing now is I don't know the last time I personally have ever used a telephone book. I mean, just think about what do you do with you? Do you keep yours?
Use one.
Okay.
The reason why I keep them is I get so many of them. It's like they're just constantly coming.
Eventually, it just becomes easier just to throw them in a drawer than walk to the trash can.
I suppose, but I don't know why they keep renewing them. I guess, but
yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know. Some things that are definitely going extinct. Well, I mean, there are.
When's the last time you've seen a payphone?
Very seldom.
Yeah.
I did see one not too long ago, but I was literally in the middle of nowhere in Illinois, and there's no cell service. Yeah. I have miles where there's no cell service. There's no LTE, so I can't listen to podcasts.
Wow,
it's rough. And I forgot to download them on this last trip, and I was stuck.
Going through Illinois is the worst state to drive in this country.
I really think so.
I've driven through Kansas, and the states that you typically associate with boring states, but
right.
Illinois, to me, Illinois is the Chicago's farm. To me, that's what it is.
Right. Yeah. I don't enjoy it. Sorry if you're from Illinois and you love it. God bless you, more power to you. But I don't look forward to driving through your state.
No.
Sorry. And I probably missed all the good parts, but from my perspective on the interstate,
I-70 through Illinois to me is terrible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wind.
Right.
Yeah.
And driving a big truck and trailer, like we do, it's not fun.
Yeah.
But inevitably, as things change, there's going to be jobs lost. There's going to be industries that go by the wayside. There's now we're seeing death of like retail. Several Circuit City went out of business a few years ago.
Right.
There's some big companies that went under. Borders, bookstores. Looks like Sears is definitely on their way out. Their credit's so bad that Whirlpool and Maytag won't even sell them anything. That they dropped those lines. They owned Craftsman, which is the last thing of value they really owned. They sold it. Yeah. So I mean, they're going under. I think JCPenney will go under soon. So it's just the inevitable march of progress. I think online shopping is killing retail.
Yeah,
not completely, but the weak links are all going to die.
Right.
So when it comes to the job market, is it ethical to? Okay, so your question is it ethical to create something that will definitely take away a lot of jobs?
I mean, I think you were bringing up the Industrial Revolution. It did that exact same thing in a sense,
right?
Like, it took away a lot of the mom and pop operations, much like online shopping has taken away a lot of the mom and pop.
Or Walmart did when it came around.
Sure. Walmart, big box stores.
Right.
Will, take away a lot of the local business. Is that ethical? I guess you could argue. But,
right. Or then there's a counter question there. Is it ethical to impede progress, in probably potentially in areas like I'm sure that AI, stemming from what they're learning now from Sophia and think projects like this, is probably going to improve medicine, healthcare.
Yeah.
In the future, is going to improve ecology, ecological concerns.
Right.
It runs the gamut.
Yes.
So impeding progress to save some jobs, some hypothetical jobs, is that ethical?
Right. When I was going through my training in robotics in the school I went to, one of the coolest things I think that I was able to take part in was the robots or the school I went to, they actually manufacture the robots as well. And so they had I guess you would say their display room, where they kind of show off their robots. They had one that performs very delicate back surgery.
Oh, wow.
And it goes into your spine. and they train people in, like, what I would do in that sense as a robotics programmer. I would work one-on-one with the doctor. The doctor will be kind of orally walking me through the surgery, and I'm programming the robot to do the moves.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's incredible.
it is. And this was almost 15 years ago. And so, I mean, I'm sure lots progressed since then.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I see. I work in hospitals,
Right.
practically every day, and I see, just things like roving med carts full of medicine that are self-driving. They're robots. They're programmed
Right.
to deliver medicine and things to different floors in the hospital, whatever. But it's the first time you see one, or the first time I saw one, it's pretty crazy. It's like, excuse me, and it's behind me.
Yeah.
And I turn around and it's a big square or rectangle thing on wheels, but it's talking to me and saying, excuse me. And then it pulls up to the elevator and says, waiting on elevator, waiting on elevator. And I'm like, what in the world? And I figured out that it was what it was, but
Yeah.
I mean, everything, from surgeries to just delivering things. I mean,
Right.
There's robotics.
We've talked about material handlers at the business I work at. I would much rather the robot actually speak to me than what the ones that I deal with do.
Oh yeah,
Because it's kind of rude.
they don't say anything.
They just beep at
They just
you.
beep beep beep.
Yeah.
Like, okay, come on.
And excuse me would have been nice. They should have worked
Right.
that into that. But so I don't know. That's funny. But yeah, I mean, taking away jobs. Now I know that it would create jobs as well.
Right.
It's going to create highly skilled jobs. It's going to require people to go to college, get a degree in, computer science, or whatever is necessary to even as low as like maintenance.
Right.
But it's still a skilled job that requires
Training. Pretty specified. There's specific training. Yeah.
And so, but it takes away from the menial tasks that I guess us humans, deem as menial, as material handling, or
Right. And they're probably really inefficient for humans to do.
Right. But what's that say to the people that either don't want to go get the training, don't want to go to college, just want to go in and put in their, 8 hours and go home and not worry about any of that stuff, or B, that just was never afforded the luxury of going to school, or even graduating high school for that sense.
Right.
Where, they can go to work in a factory and get a decent paying job as opposed to going to a McDonald's or something.
Well, I feel like manufacturing in the U.S. it's not going to completely go away, obviously, right. But it is a thing, almost becoming a thing of the past.
Right.
Because, and I mean that in terms of unskilled labor, basically, because there are cheaper places to do it. And we see that with factories going overseas.
Yeah.
And, Trump wants to try to fix that with tariffs. And, the only problem is, and I understand where he's coming from, and it sounds like a good idea on the surface, but economics 101 will tell you that companies that pay tariffs to import things to the U.S., instead of moving the factories back here, what they will do is just charge more.
Yeah.
And the cost is passed on to the consumer. So there's really not a good way to fix it. I think Asia, I think that the global economy is working out kinks in that the working conditions and pay rates and things in Asia are starting to come up.
Mm-hmm.
And they're starting to move into more of an information-based economy, even though manufacturing is massive there right now. I truly believe that you'll see, as the African Union tends to, if they can be effective in stabilizing some of the situations in some of the countries in Africa, I think you'll see a dramatic rise in manufacturing in Africa over the next 15 to 20 years.
Right.
And then you'll see we will be here in basically a post-manufacturing economy. And then you'll see Asia move into that. And you'll see maybe Eastern Europe and Africa move into this. They have the raw materials there. Yeah. They have the workforce there. Stable governments are really all they're waiting on. Mm-hmm. So I think it moves and it brings everyone up with it. And I think the problem here more than ethics of whether or not you should create that situation where people are going to be out jobs. Maybe it's a problem of our education system in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not suggesting free college for everybody, and somebody has to pay for it, obviously, but access. Right now, anybody in any neighborhood with all the worst conditions you can imagine could have access, or they could go to college.
Yeah,
they could have it paid for,
right.
But the access isn't there. So it's getting the funding to the people is the problem. And there's things, and I can't remember the name of the organization, but there's a few organizations that work in this area, and one is it's called something Bridge, but it's I'll think of it and we'll put it in the show notes. But it helps to bring college funding to kids that are under privileged.
Right.
Yeah. And
there's also 21st Centuries as well, which is a scholarship awarded. It's a full ride scholarship if you meet a certain criteria. And usually it's income based, it's need based. So if your parents make less than, I'm just putting a number out, 50,000 a year or something. If a child makes a C or better, they can go to college absolutely 100% free.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I know it's for Indiana. I'm not sure about other states, but
and Quest Bridge, by the way, is the one I was thinking of. Quest Bridge, but there are all these programs that are given the funds,
mm-hmm.
and now we have the programs finally that are helping work on access, and I think it's improving the situation. Right. And I think as we go forward, I hate to sound condescending toward people that work in unskilled jobs, and I don't mean to, but in the future, we're just going to have to know what the reality of the economy is and aspire to be able to be, productive and competitive in it.
Sure. And it'll make us a better country and, compete on the world stage. Because we got robots gaining citizenship in foreign countries, What's
right.
to say for America? We used to be the country that
cutting edge.
Yeah, push the boundaries. And
so, then you get into
the like years away from that now.
Right. I know, we're way behind Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And I mean, so so is it ethical? And maybe this isn't even an ethical question. This is actually a political question, I guess. So should a robot or an AI enabled android, whatever you want to call it, be able to have citizenship?
That's a good question.
What does citizenship say about it? Does it mean you're accepting this android as human, as sentient, as whatever?
That's the same question. Me having citizenship of a nation, is that definition of me being human?
Not necessarily.
Yeah. So how does that equate to an AI in a sense where, if it's not required for me to be human, why should it be required for a robot to be a robot or
right
or human characteristics?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's really symbolic, honestly. Saudi Arabia is doing this to position themselves as the place or a place or maybe even the place to invest in things like robotics and AI.
Right. And, I think it's probably Saudi Arabia has a bad rap.
Yeah, they kind of do. Well, Middle Eastern countries, they get lumped in with the other ones.
Yeah. And, so they're being progressive
mm-hmm.
and, trying to make their mark on the world stage, I suppose.
Right.
In a sense.
And you've got a lot of extremely wealthy, very intelligent businessmen in that room who know the importance of competing, in this arena. Basically, the future of business is in a lot of ways going to be in, I think, robotics, AI, and also nanotechnology. Nanotechnology. Yeah. So they're positioning themselves for that, and it's a smart move.
Yes.
But basically, the citizenship is symbolic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. It was some kind of. I took it more or less as a publicity stunt.
Absolutely, yeah. That's exactly what it was. But it does raise a lot of interesting questions because, and they talk about it on in the interview, but because Sophia is so lifelike
Right.
in the way she interacts and the way she looks because of the face, and it brings up, a lot of really interesting questions, and one of them being the idea of the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
So this is when basically an android or a humanoid object appears almost to be be a human, but not quite. And it creates this kind of creepiness almost.
Yeah, she was definitely creepy.
Mhm.
'Cause, she would do a little quick quip, like you said,
Right.
and then have this really creepy smile afterwards. Like it was just, I was like,
And like you said, the dead eyes.
yeah, she
just
definitely
like
had dead eyes.
really, yeah.
They need to work on the eyes.
I think, yeah.
If I had to write notes for Hanson Industries, right?
Robotics, Hanson Robotics,
Hanson
yeah.
Robotics, I would say work on the eyes.
Yeah, the eyes were a little creepy, especially with that creepy
Yeah.
smile, like pseudo smile thing.
Yeah.
But I mean, no, but it's incredible. I mean, really, it's we make fun of the little things, but it's overall it's an incredible achievement.
It is. It's. I mean, a robot to think on its own,
and it's basically what. So there's the idea of machine learning,
right?
And a lot of podcasters, go really into. And Bryce does a great job. He edits our podcast. He does all the music.
Mm-hmm.
But then afterwards, we do run our podcast through a program that tweaks it a little more.
Yeah.
And it's pretty impressive because a lot of podcasters don't use this. They think it's like too lowbrow or something. I think you need
to like the equivalent of using auto-tune.
Yeah, it's like right. It's like the auto-tune for podcasts.
Yeah.
Whatever. We're not that pretentious, so we use it, and it's actually really great. And the amazing thing about it is it's an algorithm that using the way I understand it, using machine learning, basically, it's a self-learning algorithm. So it's there's an algorithm that removes certain things and filters certain things and brings other things up in the mix so you can hear more clearly. And but over time, it learns how to do it better.
Right. Well, for instance, we record our podcast in my home. The microphone picks up a lot of stuff.
And actually, the last couple episodes, you might pick up a little echo because we're recording in a different room,
right,
than usual, and you might hear some footsteps,
right. Maybe even a lawnmower,
right.
But there have been lawnmowers noise in previous episodes, and that software you're talking about took that out,
right.
And that blows my mind.
And at some point, this is the crazy thing. Once the algorithm is set in motion, it learns on its own. So at some point, it learned how to do that.
Right.
That blows my mind.
Yeah, and it's crazy.
That goes away. So machine learning, you got that this history in robotics programming, but machine learning is a whole nother level because it's basically learning the program itself,
right,
to some degree. So then you get into some really scary territory here.
Yeah.
I know there's the 3 laws of robotics, right? Which actually came from Isaac Asimov, right? Did he not create that? Did he write that in one of his books?
Did.
I think he did. Maybe iRobot.
Probably, yeah.
And then it's actually used kind of as a basis for, ethics in this.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of the laws being that an android or robot can't harm a human,
right.
Has to obey humans, unless an order from a human would cause it to harm another human or, whatever. But with machine learning and adaptability of this new AI, is it possible for something like Sophia, maybe Sophia 9.6 or whatever, the future version, to decide to do something that is bad for humanity in some way?
Right. We get that so much in Hollywood, I suppose.
Oh, yeah.
And, even in...
Well, it plays out well on the screen. Books on the screen. Yeah. Blade Runner,
right.
You talk about Philip Dick and...
iRobot was the...
Isaac Asimov, yeah.
And so we have this... I think we have a preconceived notion that could happen.
Well, one day the robots, I mean, it's common knowledge.
Machines are going to take over.
They're going to rise up and take over. Terminator.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's...
So maybe that's the romanticizing it in a sense.
Hollywood has it's amazing the influence that it does have. Just in the thought process.
As a robotics programmer, I know that a robot can't do anything I don't program it to do.
Right.
And so ultimately, there's a human behind.
Right.
Even the algorithm, there's a human behind it.
Right.
An intelligent being behind it.
Right.
That's not a robot.
Are you saying that Sophia's not intelligent?
No.
How offensive is that, Bryce? She has feelings too.
All robots' lives matter.
Yes, hashtag robot lives matter. Hey, she would be frowning right now if she were here.
Yeah, that's true. And then do that creepy smile.
Yeah, and then exactly.
And then I would.
And then say, and she would say, Bryce, how do you know that you are intelligent? And then she would smile.
Right.
Yeah.
Because I think and feel.
Like you speak in robots.
Yeah.
So it's my question, and I don't know anything about programming robotics other than what I mean. I guess in a popular sense, I read popular science stuff, but I'm not trained as you are. But I think of the human element. Think about it, driving, for example, or whatever. Usually it's the human error that causes problems in most situations in life.
That's true.
So is it possible that the human programming the AI that learns would miss some kind of would miss one possibility where this machine could learn something it shouldn't learn? Or
right. I think that it obviously brings up a whole nother set of issues, but can a robot act in a situation morally?
Right.
What are robot morals, so to speak? Can we instill human morals into a artificial intelligence?
Well, I would almost argue that robots should be programmed to and probably would react in a much more clearly defined moral way.
We're going to use logic,
right,
and reasoning.
Well, the morality would be very strict.
Or humans use emotions a lot of
Right.
times. So
our morality is muddied.
Yeah.
And theirs wouldn't be.
Right.
But then you have the question of what do you do if you're gonna the brakes go out and you're either gonna hit a group of children or you're gonna hit a bus full of elderly people, and either way the same amount of people die.
Right.
What do you do? I mean, all these questions.
It's the same argument that's used. There's 9 people in the elevator. And there's the elevator stops, and you're losing oxygen. And if you had 8 people in the elevator, the oxygen would be at a normal level.
So who do you choke out?
Yeah,
or suffocate or whatever.
Right. Or
I guess maybe the question is, should you? Not which one, but right.
Yeah. So how are you going to eliminate the person that
So who's had the longest, richest, fullest life and is closer? I don't know. How do you decide?
Let's say you even had a gun in the elevator.
Right. That becomes an interesting scenario.
Yeah. And so who do you kill?
Is the right thing? Okay. Now, let's open up another question here. Yeah. Murder is a sin. To kill yourself would be a sin. But to let everybody else die would be a problem too. Do you shoot yourself?
Right.
Is self-sacrifice honorable in that scenario? Or is it just murdering yourself without an ability to repent for it?
Yeah. I guess it's I think superhero movies play it out to the extreme. But who does Spider-Man save? Does Spider-Man save Mary Jane, or the ship that's going down with hundreds of people on it?
Right.
Ultimately they play it out where he gets to save both.
Well, of course. But, in reality, Mary Jane should have died.
Yeah. One or the other.
Or either way, he should have blood on his hands.
First of all, it's his human element to save Mary Jane. Right. Because that's the love of his wife.
Right. And, and she's real to him, not just in the fact that they're in love, but the fact that she's very humanized, where the people on there are just numbers. They aren't really humanized. Yeah. Well, and this brings up another question. Humanizing or dehumanizing. So throughout history, the way we and I say we very broadly, but the way we as humans have justified killing other humans is by dehumanizing them.
Yeah.
So during World War II era, Nazi Germany, it was, Jews were looked at, and this whole political uh, agenda at the time was that they were basically not human. Slavery in the U.S. and as a result, 6 million Jews were killed in the Holocaust, and 50 million people overall were killed during World War II.
Yeah.
So dehumanization played a huge role in what happened to the Jews, and not only Jews, but Jews, gay people, mentally handicapped people, a lot. I mean, just all kinds of things. Slavery in the U.S. Slavery in general.
Right.
When the slave trade became a big thing, and you have to acknowledge that the shift from slavery that was happening, around the world, really for millennia, in cases of war, people who were taken as prisoners of war, people who owed a debt and were working it off, basically.
Right, a lot of the, I would say, the biblical slavery that we read in the Old Testament was that.
It was working off a debt, things like that, or working as a prisoner. Like today, we have in the the prison, prisons in the U.S. people who work in some cases for basically nothing.
Right.
But they probably should, because they're paying basically they're paying for their lodging,
right,
and their food. So that was happening, of course, with tribal wars in Africa. And when people talk about that, slavery was already a thing. Well, that's what it was. It was prisoners of war and being used in that way. What happened with the slave trade was we started buying and selling people as commodities.
Mm-hmm.
And when we did that, we had to dehumanize them. So then all of a sudden, people of color were not human.
Right.
And, now, current day, it's abortion. The embryo, air quotes again, is not human.
Does life begin at conception or at birth? We are dehumanizing, like you said.
Right.
The embryo.
Yeah. If you're making that unborn baby less than human, you're doing the same thing that Hitler did with the Jews. I mean, really, I hate to be that harsh about it, but it's true.
Yeah, we're going to get some notes on this.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, it's true, though. It's true. Yeah. It's the same process. Coming from a different place. I understand that. I do understand that. But it is the same kind of thing. Now, with robots and with AI, obviously, Sophia has a face which humanizes her in our mind. So I'd think of her differently. And see, I'm still referring to this robot as her. I mean, it's like...
Yeah, we're already genderizing it.
We're talking about her like a human.
Yeah.
But it's because she doesn't look like the rectangle with wheels at the hospital that says, excuse me. And if it had a face, I might call it he or she or whatever. So... Hands and Robotics has made this decision. With a lot of their other projects aren't very, they don't have a face at all.
Right.
Some pretty fascinating projects. But with Sophia, very much a human face, and it humanizes her. So then the question becomes, how much should robots be humanized? And then, if... there's the question. Of course, you get into really deep philosophical questions of the soul and things like that. But just to keep it grounded, if a robot, how do you know if a robot knows if it's self-aware? Yeah. If a robot seems to be self-aware, then what kind of rights should it have? And I think, there's things, and this is, a whole other issue of sex bots. Robots that are designed for sex,
right?
And they look very lifelike, very human-like. And I think they're intentionally designed to not be very intelligent, for obvious reasons. But
the bimbo line, so to speak.
Yeah, the bimbo bot.
Yeah.
So it's kind of disturbing in a lot of ways. And there was even an article recently about child sex dolls. And the idea that it would prevent pedophiles from offending.
So let's encourage the act of...
Right. So then then the question is it encouraging the act?
Yeah.
but with a surrogate,
Right.
or is it diverting
Basically,
attention
we're
from
saying
real victims?
there's really no hope for these people
Well, yeah,
because psychologically they are totally disturbed. So why don't we just take out the 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 bad element of the crime
right.
and replace it?
Well, the victim. You're removing the victim.
Right.
Okay, so then if the thing is, if AI gets to the point where it's very aware of what's going on in some sense, at what point does it not become a victimless crime anymore? Then you have the idea of, okay, this robot, let's use Sophie as an example.
Yeah.
Say she's, being experimented on, whatever, different reprogrammed, used for profit without being compensated. Basically, that's slavery, right?
Yeah.
And at a point when she becomes intelligent and maybe sentient, however you want to define that,
Yeah.
then I don't think you can argue that she has a soul, but you could. But then data, I think, argues that the idea of the soul.
Yeah.
But you could definitely argue whether or not it's ethical to force even a robot that doesn't want to do it to work for no pay.
That's interesting. That's very interesting because obviously that's what they're programmed for.
Right.
And so they develop a conscience,
right,
so to speak, and decide that they don't want to.
I don't want to do this anymore. And especially when you start talking about sex robots, and I can only imagine that in the future, people will propose the idea of eliminating, victims in the sex trade with as far as sex workers go,
Right.
Prostitutes or whatever, and especially in places where it's technically illegal, or even places where it's legal, eliminate the risk of venereal disease and things like that through the use of basically AI or robotic brothels. I can only imagine that's in the near future. And it eliminates the risk of disease. You'd have all these proponents who say, "Oh, it's a great idea for society." I'm sure you'd have all the opponents of it who say, "Well, yeah, but it's the sex trade. We don't want that in our neighborhood."
Yeah.
You're gonna have both sides just like you do now. But then, what about in that scenario, when a robot says, "I don't want to do this anymore"?
Yeah.
So when it is still no when a robot says it, can a robot be sexually assaulted?
Can you rape a robot?
Basically, yeah.
That's wow.
It gets really, really murky when you start talking about this.
Yeah. Wow. We went into a different direction than I planned.
It's an inevitable. I think it's inevitably going to come up,
right?
In this,
it's true. I mean, in the next, let's say that Sophia type robots really take off, type AIs really take off, and
very, very humanoid.
And
I would say.
I know in Japan they've had this technology for a long time,
right?
We're just now starting to see it more so in America. For instance, cars that will automate back into a parking spot.
Oh, right.
And, that technology is now starting to come more into America, but Japan's had it for years.
Yeah.
And it was one of the coolest things. When I was there, it was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Because literally, the guy got out of his car and he had some kind of button, and the car was back into the spot.
That's brilliant. And I've seen some people that really need that.
Right. And, Japan, I find it necessary in the sense that it's an island. It's a nation.
Oh, yeah.
There's so many people on this island.
There's no space.
There is no space. They're not building out. They're literally building out.
Yeah.
And it's like, just because, they have parking garages that went vertical. Not
right.
horizontal.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And they basically lift the car up, right? I've seen that. I've seen this thing. Yeah. It's kind of almost like a conveyor belt.
Right.
That grabs the car and lifts it up, or it's strange.
It's really it's cool.
But you don't have to have room to open your doors to get out of your car, I guess, right? Yeah. So your parking spaces can be narrower.
Right.
And you don't have to, obviously parallel parking becomes a lot easier.
So yeah, when space is an issue, here in America we don't have that. We really
we got tons of wide open space.
But in Japan, obviously, they have a big issue with it, so they've combated it with AI, and so it's neat to see it come, but it's at the same time like we're talking about Sophia in the sense, is it right for her to become a citizenship? I think we're not a philosophical podcast. We've talked about politics, philosophy,
Right.
history. We're just running the gamut here
Right.
of what our podcast is, and now we're doing interview episodes. So it's I've enjoyed our variety,
Oh yeah.
but at the same time, we are a podcast that wants to take culture and theology and social issues and bring it home to apostolics.
Right.
So how should apostolics feel? How should even in the general sense, how should Christians feel about and maybe I'm playing the devil's advocate here too, but how should Christians feel about science and even industry playing God?
Right. So that's the question. And I don't really want to even tell people how to feel about it. I guess that's, not really what we're going to do, but give my opinion, I guess. So you talked earlier before we started recording about God as the creator.
Right.
Not only as the creator, but creating us in his image, in that we are creative.
Right.
And I think that we are, and I've said this before on the podcast, but I feel like we are operating in many ways, operating in the will of God when we do create new things, because he created us to be creative.
Right. I agree with that. Yeah.
So I have to think that, I think you mentioned this earlier about, robotics and Sophia, for example, that it being a great achievement and being something, possibly that God intended for us to do.
Very well could be.
Because he gave us the knowledge and the drive and the desire to create. And this is where it's led. So now you mentioned something earlier about possibility of in 10 to 15 years, I think you said.
Yeah.
They plan to program androids to procreate,
right,
to have children. Now, we don't know. Okay, we're gonna have to go back and research this probably, whether they're talking about building their own children that are androids, or some sort of artificial insemination and incubation, or I don't know. Either way is possible, theoretically.
I read this in an article, and I believe it came from National Geographic. I'm not 100% on that. I'll have to go back and look, but I believe it to be credible. I believe they are trying to do this but I read something else recently too, and this may even take the abortion argument out of the whole political spectrum. They are, I don't know who it is, but they want to create, it's in the works or something, a artificial womb.
Oh yeah, yeah.
That, they can.
I actually think they maybe were successful. I think I read that they were successful with the trial. I don't want to misquote, but I believe I read that.
So a person wanting an abortion can go to
embryo can be transplanted, basically.
Yeah, basically, and the child, it would go through the whole 9 months and develop and be born in a sense. What they do with the baby afterwards, I'm not sure, but that takes away the abortion argument.
And here's where it leads. I do feel like that we're not going to reach the level where we can create a thing with a soul.
Right.
Any kind of any human that's grown in a lab is a creation of God, no matter how much man had input in it.
Right.
So, I don't think, I'm less concerned about us overstepping ethical boundaries there than I am with ethical issues like abortion. So like you said, if this advanced technology can somehow solve the ethical issue of abortion, or, even, I try to be, I'm not a vegetarian. If you saw me, you would probably know that I'm not a vegetarian or a vegan or anything. a big guy.
Nor am I.
Right. Neither
I
Bryce
like-
nor
I like meat.
Yeah, I love meat. I love, animals are the most delicious foods, and I mean, just in general, I love all of them equally. And I actually am an animal lover in general. A lot live animals as well.
Yeah.
But I do love to eat meat, so don't get it twisted. But I'm not a vegan. But I do like to be. I do think of myself as a conscious carnivore. Like, I don't like the idea of how things are farmed and how animals are treated on farms. I've seen it, big commercial farms.
Right.
I think it's kind of makes you feel icky when you think about it. I really think it's probably ethically wrong, honestly. And I think Christians, especially conservative Christians, apostolics, should think about that.
Yeah.
And we don't.
Yeah, I watched the famous documentary Food Inc.
Food Inc. Yeah.
And it was eye-opening, but I probably spent 2 weeks trying to be a vegetarian.
No, I think I did too. I didn't spend that long, maybe a day, but
yeah.
I did think about it at least.
Yeah.
But after, that's one of the things that influenced me, actually.
Yeah.
After that and doing some reading, I did rethink, how I try to source meat. We eat out a lot, which is not probably great. But when we eat at home, I try to source meat from a local place where with free range chickens and happy grass fed cows.
We live, where we're surrounded by, farmers markets everywhere. So we have the opportunity to do that.
Right. And so I think those kind of things should be an ethical consideration. And technology now, I just read this the other day, technology has allowed us to be able to grow meat separate from the animal. Now, this is crazy.
Yeah.
And as long as it tastes the same, I'm interested. Okay. They got my interest here. So they say they can take some meat, a small sample of meat from an animal without killing it, and it can go on to live a happy, healthy life. And that meat can be grown in a lab to a size that's then harvested for meat for public consumption. So the idea is that at this point, it's not scalable to make it replace farms. But I absolutely believe that if you can do that, then you probably should do that. And I think,
well, it would certainly solve world hunger.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And honestly, if those kind of ethical questions, if we start asking ourselves, and even pollution, and a lot of people have this knee-jerk reaction, a lot of conservative Christians especially, it's has nothing to do with the fact they're Christian. It has to do with the fact that they're conservative.
Right.
When you start talking about pollution and global warming, and I don't know, I'm not a scientist, I have no idea. I'm just going to throw it out there. And the people who are preaching about global warming destroying the earth don't know, because most of them aren't scientists. And the people saying that it's a hoax, they don't know because they're not scientists. So let's be honest, most of us don't know anything about it. But here's the thing. I know that pollution is a thing because I go to a lot of big cities where you can tell the difference in air quality from when you're driving across the boring plains of Illinois.
Yeah.
From when you go into, Chicago or Kansas City or whatever, these different cities. So, we should at least take these things seriously and think, God give us dominion, which doesn't mean, just kill all the animals and eat them, destroy the earth. It means take care of it. We're taking care of something that's his.
Right.
So I think ethical dilemmas, obviously the ethical dilemma of pollution or sourcing meat in a way that's not cruel to animals, as little as those things seem to a lot of people, I think they're more important than the question of the ethics of robotics and AI. And I think the advancements in robotics and AI can help us solve those other ethical questions, especially like you said with abortion. To me, that's huge.
Yeah, that is a really big deal because, like I said, it just takes the argument off the table.
Right.
And it would no longer become an issue.
Right. Exactly.
And as a Christian, as a conservative Christian who believes in, not accepting abortion, that believes in life at conception,
right?
That believes abortion is murdering of innocent babies.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with AI wombs.
Oh, I'm okay with if they could make Sophia
a surrogate.
Yeah, I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I think now the problem is, what are you going to do with all these unwanted children?
That's the thing. That's, what happens to the child. I mean, obviously, I think they're going to be in a lab for a while to be tested, and
Obviously, yeah, probably for developmental.
yeah.
And I was listening to a podcast actually. Which one was it? Now I can't remember. I listened to so many podcasts, I lose track. Anyway,
You have that problem as well.
Yeah, I do. It was okay. It was Cults. The podcast name is Cults. It's from the Parcast Network. And they have some great, really highly well edited shows. I guess high production values. They're really great. But Cults is interesting. Of course, they talk about like the Manson family and Jonestown and stuff like that. But this episode was talking about the family, which is not the Manson family, but this cult in Australia that was led by a woman named Anne Hamilton Byrne. Anyway, moral of the story is the reason I brought this podcast. They were talking about kids growing up in foster homes, or more specifically, actually growing up in orphanages.
Okay.
And there's actually a slower or less development of gray and white matter in the brain. So if I understand neural biology, I guess, or whatever, I guess the gray matter is like where stuff happens, computations happen basically, and the white matter is like neurotransmitters, or it's like the telephone lines between the gray matter, for lack of a better term. It transmits information between different parts of the brain. So, and it's shown that if at a point, at the right point, they're taken out of an orphanage, for example, and put with parents or adopted, the white matter can grow, but the gray matter doesn't increase. So there's actually some areas that end up being underdeveloped. And I said that to say this. I think children growing up in that experimental lab setting would probably suffer from some developmental issues, right? Even if they're not drastic, like even if they pick up language and things like that. And it's the question that was brought up in this episode of their podcast was, is it possible that someone's background, the way someone was raised as a child, could make them, not necessarily make them do something terrible, but make them more susceptible to do something terrible? Is there some brain science that could explain why they did some of the things they did? And there was Andrei Chikatilo, or there's a Russian serial killer who was hit in the head very hard, and they think that it damaged him as like prefrontal cortex, or whatever it is that controls emotions and things like that. And they think that it possibly caused damage that made him at least more susceptible to doing the things he did, or more able to do. Not that there's no personal responsibility there. Obviously, the person's still responsible for their actions, but are they more likely to do it, or are they driven to do it because of some kind of brain science? So I think there's some ethical questions then about raising children in a lab environment.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
And
we brought up so many questions, I think, more than we gave answers.
Oh yeah, I'm sure
in this episode.
You all can think about this. Let me give you a challenge as Christians. Okay. Sure. Okay. Think about this. And this is kind of off, we got here in a roundabout way, but if robotics and AI and all these scientific and technological advancements do solve the abortion issue, and we are, just think about this hypothetical for a minute. There are a bunch of extra, millions potentially, of extra children that are unwanted. What is the responsibility of the church? And I think you can ask yourself this question in relation to all of these issues of, like, how seriously do you take the little things, like our dominion over the earth? We talked about, sourcing, ethically sourcing meat, or, making sure that you're not polluting more than is necessary, burning tires in your backyard for fun or whatever.
Yeah.
But we need to think about these things as Christians, even the little things, but especially things like, okay, now we've solved the abortion issue, but there's millions of extra children that are unwanted. What is your responsibility as a Christian? Are you pro-life enough to adopt 3 kids?
Wow. Yeah, that's true. That's the pick your battles kind of
Right.
situation again.
How pro-life are you? I guess that's
right. I mean, yeah. I mean, you would have to be. You would have to be all in or all out, in my opinion.
Yeah. If
it's kind of it's the same thing with abortion today.
Yeah.
I mean, we are as Christians, we feel you need to be totally against it.
Right.
Even in situations where the mother was, raped or, sexually assaulted in some sense that resulted in a pregnancy. And
which is really, really, really rare.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Statistically speaking, yes, it is rare.
Right. But you have to recognize the humanity in that situation of how terrible it would be for that mother. But yeah.
Right. So yeah, you have to be willing to be all in. Like I said, if you're going to stand for or against something, you're going to stand for 100% or against 100%. So same thing goes with AI births. If you are going to say, okay, this eliminates the abortion aspect of the situation, but what do we do with these,
right?
Artificially intelligent born children that are actual humans, real life humans,
right?
We need to say, yeah, we need to adopt. We need to, they can't just be born and raised in a lab for 18 years,
right?
And then all of a sudden set on their own. I mean, and expect to live
But at that point, they're basically being programmed,
right?
Not raised, really.
And so, I mean, they're robots in a sense.
In a very real sense, there would be. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So, and another thing, I've often thought of this, and I think we're probably going to talk about it in a future episode. But I'll just throw it in here, interject it, because I think it plays into the same question of how pro-life are you? Are you willing to adopt? Are you willing to adopt more kids than you could fit? In your current situation, are you willing to live at a lower lifestyle or a lower level of comfort to accommodate more kids? I don't know if I'm there, but then there's also the question of you're anti-abortion, but are you really pro-life? Do you believe in the death penalty?
That's so true. I mean, I feel like you cannot be pro-life and believe in the death penalty.
I agree.
That's my opinion. I know so many conservative Christians are against that.
Oh yeah, they're all about it. Let's kill everybody as soon as somebody the news story breaks that somebody killed a child, especially, or something like that.
Yeah,
like take him out back and shoot him.
Yeah, that's terrible. I see it on Facebook all the time.
And I get that emotional, that knee-jerk emotional reaction. Oh, I hate it. especially when it involves kids or something like that. I saw a news story. Oh my gosh, I don't even want to talk about it, but I feel like I read it this morning. I have to. This couple in Iowa, I can only assume that they were on drugs. I think they had 2 children, at least 2 children. One stayed in the room with them. The other 4-month-old baby was in another room. Did you see this story?
No, I haven't.
It's awful. Just a disclaimer: if kids in the car, shut the podcast off, pause it. It's really disturbing. But basically, what happened is the dad called 911 and said that their 4-month-old had died. And his story was that he had just fed the baby an hour or so earlier, and then it died. Well, when medics got there, the EMTs got there, whatever, they found the 4-month-old in an automatic, battery operated swing, and the baby had been dead for over a week and was basically just rotting in the swing.
It's terrible.
And then after a little more investigation, they came to the conclusion that the baby had been in that swing, not bathed, fed, or diaper changed or anything for a week prior to its death.
Yeah.
So My knee-jerk reaction is
The parents deserve
that
to
they
die.
need to die.
Yeah.
Let's give them both the lethal injection, get it over with, no appeals.
You know, I even have people on my Facebook that would go to the extreme of saying we need to bring back the shooting gallery or the
public hanging.
Public hangings. You know, they need to deserve an awful death.
Make an example out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I get where they're coming from, and I get that emotional response.
Right.
But it's not the Christian response.
No, it's not. You know, yeah, to bring it to the Christian in the sense, what did Jesus teach us? You know,
right.
You know, you've heard that it was eye for an eye or, you know, tooth for tooth. But,
exactly.
You know, Jesus taught us to love our enemies.
Yeah.
And, you know, to turn
the other cheek.
Yeah. It's
if somebody takes your coat, give them your cloak also.
Right.
Whatever, you know.
We've said it before on the podcast, but it's like these things that are so radical in our minds were the very things taught by God.
Exactly.
You know, we as apostolics believe, you know, 100% that Jesus is God.
Right.
You know, and so I just don't get it, I guess. It's like all of our knee-jerk reactions that we have are totally anti-God.
They are.
Yeah.
And that's called human nature.
Right.
And if we don't address it, it's not, the issue isn't that you have that knee-jerk reaction. I think the issue is that you just accept it and go with it.
Right.
And Brother Aaron Airwood, who we just interviewed on the last episode.
Yeah. We got the timing right.
Yeah. Now we're back on track, I think, with our order here.
Yeah.
In his book, Countercultural Youth Ministry, he talks about this and the idea of authenticity. And, you know, I've always been one to promote the idea of authenticity. And I think our leaders need to be authentic in that, you know, you should know that we're subjected to temptations just like everybody else. And we struggle and we do this and that. But in the context of youth ministry, he talks about the fact that you can't just say, well, it's, you know, I'm being authentic and use that as an excuse to just do whatever you want. Because yeah, your authentic self is probably a lot more human nature and a lot less Christ in you. So authenticity, while it's important and while people respond well to it, you can't use authenticity as an excuse just to do whatever you want. And I think it goes back to even the stuff like this.
Right.
You can't just say, well, I'm just being honest and continue to act that way. Now, I think authenticity is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Be honest and say that, yeah, that's my first emotional response, but I know it doesn't align with what Christ teaches. So I check myself, and that's the Holy Ghost checking you in your spirit and saying, something's not right.
Right.
And we gotta be conscious. We gotta pay attention to that.
Okay. So we have gone off subject majorly in this episode, which is fine. I love our format that we just talk, and whatever comes to our mind comes to our mind. And oftentimes we say, most of the time we, you know, or I wouldn't say most of the time, the times that we do regret it, I edit it out. So
yeah,
you don't actually hear it. But
well, you know, then again, in 10 years, we might look back and say, did we really say that and put it on the internet? I mean,
right.
You know, I'm sure, hopefully we continue to grow. And but
so the very beginning, so an hour, in about an hour ago, we started talking about Sophia.
Right. So
let's end it on that, I think, in this episode with, you know, the original question we posed. Is it right for a robot or AI to have human characteristics, to gain citizenship, to be allowed? To me, gaining citizenship would be you're able to vote. You may even have to pay taxes. Everything that entails with citizenship.
Right.
You know, is that correct? Even in her sense, she's a citizen, or here we go, generalizing it again, but a citizen of a Muslim country.
Right.
That has very strict laws on women.
Right.
In their culture and even in their country,
and
politically even. Is she subject, or is the robot subject to those laws?
I don't know. That'd be a good question for somebody in the know. But I think that, if you're going to acknowledge her with citizenship and acknowledge her as her,
Yeah.
um, then she should be held to the same standards, I guess, even as a robot. I mean, that's just my thought. But whether or not it's right or wrong to give an android human characteristics, that's I would say, just as an aside here, voting, I would think an android would make a much more logical and informed decision than most voters on either side of the spectrum.
Yeah, that may be true. But I can definitely see that being taken advantage of.
Oh, it'd be manipulated. No doubt it'd be manipulated. But whether it's right or wrong, boy, I don't know. It's so hard to say. And I don't really want to say definitively, because I don't feel like I can back up my answer either way I go. But I do think that I'll say this. In our using our creative capacity that was given to us by God, I don't think that giving human characteristics to an android or a robot is crossing a line necessarily.
Okay.
Because we're not doing anything that would cross into territory that God was in when he created. So
yeah, and I think, maybe us humans, or those of that desire higher power, so to speak, want to vicariously live as God.
and that may be a problem for some people that are
Yeah.
designing these things and coming up with these. That may be a problem, because maybe they do want to be like God and creating something like that. And that's in science fiction that theme comes up a lot.
Right. So yeah, I mean, if it gets to that extreme, I think we do have issues, so to speak. Just us playing God is not right. But in the long run, God's not going to allow that.
No, I think if it ever gets to a point where we can literally create life out of nothing.
I mean, what do you do
then
with the Tower
that's
of Babel?
Right. He stopped it.
Yeah. And I find it interesting too. I think we even talked about it in one of our Bible studies, but in Genesis, it's kind of I think it's one of those concept, or one of those stories that we just kind of overlook sometimes, or really don't think too much about. But there are two trees in the garden,
right?
One of good and evil, and the other of knowledge of life, right?
And the tree of life, and then the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Yeah.
And so in Genesis chapter 3:22, I'm not sure who God's talking to, but he's referring to that they ate of the tree of good and evil. Let's get them out of the garden before they eat of the tree of life, or they would live forever. I think I said this, I talked about the Tower of Babel, and we talk about this. God, no matter what our ambitions are, God's going to squash them before we get a chance to go too far.
Yeah, I think that's true.
We have the chance to go too far, to me, is what it sounds like.
Right. Yeah, I think God created within us the ability to go too far.
Yeah.
Which he basically said that with what he did with the Tower of Babel.
Right.
And I think that also we have to keep in mind that anything that's over the line is not necessarily, now humanity as a whole may suffer for it.
Right.
But I think that step over the line and the guilt associated with it would be on the person who did it.
Yeah.
So can we answer a question for all of humanity, for every individual? And the thing is, we can make suggestions, but I think eventually man probably will cross the line again.
Yeah.
I think we did it. Honestly, this is my opinion, and we'll talk about this in another podcast, I'm sure. But I think Oppenheimer realized that he stepped over the line with
Right.
the atomic bomb.
And he had that famous quote, that he's become the destroyer of worlds.
Yeah, I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Yeah.
Which is a quote from the Bhagavad Gita. Is that how you say it? It's the Hindu text.
Right. It's
Krishna says it.
Right.
Yeah, it's something to do with the Hindu religion.
Yeah.
I know it's a Hindu.
Yeah.
It's a Hindu text, but yeah, it's Krishna saying the Hindu god says it. But yeah, Oppenheimer borrows it, and it's very fitting when you look, especially reading. We talked about this. I read here. I'm actually still not finished that book. I have like a couple chapters left in Hiroshima. It's mind-boggling, the devastation. We crossed the line, and Oppenheimer realized that when he made that statement.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it probably will happen again, and
very well could.
When it does,
it could be in the near future, even in the sense of nuclear
warfare.
Exactly the issues we're dealing with North Korea. But.
Right, and there again, it's an individual or individuals.
Yeah.
Oppenheimer stepped over the line.
Yeah.
When in the developing the technology. Did Einstein have a hand in that in some of the theoretics? Mm-hmm. And that's maybe without knowing they crossed over a line,
right?
Or fully understanding it. And now Kim Jong-un is stepping over a line. But humanity as a whole will suffer for it.
Yeah, we step over the line, but I think that's the benefit, and I think it's also our duty as Christians. We need to have the faith that God is going to intervene.
Absolutely.
At some point.
Yeah, we
may cross that line, but at some point, God's going to say enough's enough.
God doesn't want us to live in fear.
Right.
He wants us to walk in faith. And yeah, absolutely. I think before it gets to the point where the line is completely obliterated, that God will step in.
Today on Two Pentecostals and a Microphone. Wow, what an episode we had today. Very interesting. We ran the gamut on subjects. We talked about robots, AI. We talked about abortion. We went into whether ethical questions, philosophical questions, and theological questions. So it's a really great conversation. I hope that you listened to it. I hope that you enjoyed it. One thing I want to add is, as far as AI, God created us to be creators. I think it's absolutely incredible, the achievements that we have done throughout the years. Whether or not it's ethical to do one thing or philosophical to do another or theological, right or wrong, doesn't matter. But what it boils down to, God created us as creators. And we are, I believe, doing that to our full potential. And I think God is pleased with that.
If you'd like to join the conversation, you can find us on social media at Two Pentecostals. That's on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also check our website, twopentecostals.com, for show notes, news, and links to Bryce and I's blogs. Also, it really helps us out if you can go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, hopefully 5 stars, and leave a review. It really helps us to get found in the rankings, and we truly appreciate it. See you next time on Two Pentecostals and a Microphone. Wow.